Beardo Benjo.
You know, people often ask me, Beardo, what are your favourite VR games? And I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't thought about it enough, so I'm not going to answer that question. But I will ask myself a question and answer that. Beardo, what are your favourite VR mods, and in what order would you rank them? That's a great question, Beardo. Let me answer with this video. These are my VR mod rankings. Now, obviously, this is completely subjective. These are personal. It's my personal opinion. So if you don't agree with me, that's fine. That's a good thing. That means we're different humans, and you aren't, in fact, a clone created from my DNA in a laboratory somewhere, because then we'd have the same opinions. Please do put down in the comments below if you do agree with me, or if you don't agree with me. I'll hear from everybody. Tell me your opinions. I'm breaking this list down into 3 categories. I was going to do it numbered, but I decided I can't. I couldn't figure it out. So I'm doing 3 categories. I'm doing pretty cool, so pretty good, you know. They are solid VR mods. They're good fun. Go check them out. But the flat screen counterpart is still probably better. Then you've got very cool, which are like, wow, these are really smart now. They're really starting to blow me away, but they're not quite native. I can see the cracks. I can see how they aren't quite comparable to a native VR product. And then you've got unbelievable, god tier, absolute tippity top, the very best VR mods out there. And those ones are the ones that could probably fool someone who isn't as experienced with VR as me into thinking they were native VR products. That's how I'm breaking down this list. I really hope you enjoy. Please do let me know in the comments if you do. But before we get to the list, would you like some free things? Everyone loves free things. Today I have 5 copies of the upcoming Half-Life 2 VR mod to give away. Now the mod is going to be free, but I'm going to give these away early. So you're going to get it 2 weeks before anyone else. I'll be ending the competition on Friday, so that's this Friday coming. You can enter the competition right now by joining the Gleam link, following the Gleam link in the description down below. Get your entries in, I'll pick the winners on Friday, and I'll email you all your codes. Get your entries in, good luck to everyone, and enjoy the list. These are the very best VR mods that exist. Enjoy. Up first is Horizon Zero Dawn, a huge open world adventure that can now be experienced in third or first person 3D VR glory. However, like with most of Luke Ross's mods, it can be tough for most moderate spec PCs to achieve consistent high frame rates, so this one is best experienced flat while we wait for the official Horizon VR experience for PSVR 2. My favourite game of 2022 so far, Elden Ring, also has its very own Luke Ross VR mod, and seeing these characters, boss encounters and environments in VR is genuinely breathtaking. However, similar to the Horizon Zero Dawn mod, it's a tough one to get running at the high frame rate required for a VR experience you can really sink hours into. Another Luke Ross VR mod up next, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. This one actually runs pretty damn well after a little tinkering and offers some truly gorgeous visuals. However, this is my list, and frankly I'm just not a big fan of Final Fantasy, so it places in the pretty cool category for me personally, as it's simply not the kind of game I'd play for hours on end in VR. Devil May Cry 5 is a sight to behold in VR. Running on the same framework that makes the Resident Evil mod such an incredible success, it looks beautiful and is no doubt a dream come true for DMC fans. However, when things get a little too intense and the action reaches blistering speeds, as it often does in Devil May Cry, it can be difficult to keep track of everything around you in VR, making this one better suited to flat screen for now. A similar story here with Monster Hunter Rise. Also built on the same framework as the Prey Dog Resident Evil VR mods, it's another triumph for gorgeous 3D visuals in VR. However, for me personally, a game like Monster Hunter is best experienced with friends over a few hours of hunting and exploring. The VR mod doesn't add much to the experience beyond the 3D visual, and if anything, makes longer play sessions difficult. For short hunts, however, it's well worth experiencing in glorious 3D VR. If I'm being honest, I think I'm still waiting for a first-person VR mod for Monster Hunter World. That's what we all want, right? Life is Strange is probably one of the strangest VR mods available today. A game that is famously very light on gameplay versus the cutscene heavy dialogue and choice focused mechanics doesn't sound like the most viable title for a VR mod. However, walking around these stunning stylized locations in first person completely changes the experience and immerses you into this world. The only reason it doesn't land a little higher is purely due to the amount of cutscenes you'll be watching, which do play out on a big floating screen in front of you, paired with the fact that Before the Storm was, in my opinion, the weaker of the Life is Strange games. But if you're looking for a chilled out seated VR experience, it's well worth diving into. Dying Light VR could have been incredible. If completed at a development level, this really could have been a AAA VR title that I would return to constantly. However, the official project was abandoned and never fully finished, meaning that right now if you activate the secret hidden VR mode in Dying Light by changing a line in the config file, you'll find yourself able to play a fairly decent but genuinely pretty wonky 3D VR version of the full game, which only runs on Oculus or now Meta headsets. It's a shame this was never finished, but if you do have a Quest 2 or a Rift S and don't mind the no motion controls and a little bit of jank, then I'd recommend you give it a try. I would give both of my arms for a true Shadow of the Colossus VR game. I have no idea how I'd play it without my arms, but trust me, I would find a way. Right now, the closest thing we have to that is a fairly simple 3D VR mod for Prey for the Gods, a Shadow of the Colossus clone which sadly can't quite compare to the brilliance of the game it's aspiring to replicate. The mod itself is pretty basic and the game isn't something I'd recommend you all run out to buy, which is why this one lands firmly in the pretty cool camp. And finally, before we move on to the very cool mid-tier of VR mods, I'll finish the pretty cool section with Vorpex, a program I do genuinely love and I have used for hundreds of hours. Vorpex was actually one of the first programs I purchased when I got my first VR-capable PC. The idea that I could experience my favourite games in VR was mind-blowing to me, and I'd say Vorpex delivered around half of the time. Older games like Outlast, Fear, Aliens vs Predator and many Unreal titles work beautifully, with great 3D and some solid features for scaling the world around you. However, there are limitations and you do need to spend time with the software to learn it. It's certainly not plug and play, and many have loftier ideas of the type of results it can achieve than is realistically possible. Vorpex is pretty cool, but only if you have the time and patience to tinker with it, whilst accepting the results won't always be fantastic. Wolfenstein 2 looks crazy in VR. The 3D here is some of the best I've seen across all VR mods, and to top it off, it runs beautifully as well. If this had true tracked motion controls, it would easily sit in the god tier section of this list. The mod should be praised, however, for having support for a number of different control schemes. You can play with a controller, with motion controls that are fully mapped to the in-game prompts, you can aim with your head or gaze, or you can use the sticks on the controllers to aim. There's even an experimental tracked motion control aiming mode, but if I'm honest, I'd steer well clear of that. It's overwhelmingly wonky. I would argue that the GTFO VR mod is the best way to play this game. The tight, tense, highly focused team-based survival game that demands communication and planning if you want to succeed feels far more immersive in virtual reality. Think Left 4 Dead meets Rainbow Six with the difficulty dialed up to 1000. I'd probably say my only words of warning are that you do need a team to really enjoy this game, so convincing a few friends to join you or hopping into some Discord servers to arrange games is required. Soloing is technically possible, but mere mortals shouldn't even attempt it. Some key actions like swinging melee weapons are also still bound to button presses. If physical actions could take their place, it would definitely elevate the mod's status. It's crazy to me how much Valheim changes when you start playing it in VR. What was once a fairly chilled out survival and crafting game becomes a tense, terrifying survival horror experience in VR. Heading out into the woods and delving into caves feels far scarier when done in the VR mod, where all combat becomes physical. Firing bows, swinging clubs and waving at friends is all perfectly implemented in virtual reality. It's just the crafting that feels a little wonky at times, with menus that aren't always the friendliest to navigate. Valheim is also bizarrely performance intensive, and the VR mod can suffer from frame drops and inconsistencies during action-packed moments. If you grew up playing games like Perfect Dark, GoldenEye and Time Splitters, then you have to treat yourself to No One Lives Forever 2, a lost espionage shooter that's now almost impossible to get a legitimate copy of. However, if you know just where to look online, you can still grab the game on PC, and the Luke Ross VR mod is near perfection if you want to be immersed into the experience. The levels are packed with objectives and exploration, the gadgets are unique and enjoyable to use, and the whole thing just feels like a fantastic nostalgic throwback to a different era of shooters. The VR mod just dials that all up with stunning 3D and a solid high frame rate. However, it is another one that requires a controller or keyboard and mouse to play. Cyberpunk 2077 was famously a bit shit when it launched. After months and months of hype, the game fell flat due to bugs, an empty open world and less than favourable performance. However, things have moved on now, and the game has received numerous patches, and this VR mod from Luke Ross turns an otherwise middle-of-the-road adventure into an immersive cyberpunk dream if you can run it on your PC. Again, it's a tough one for most moderate spec rigs, and you won't find motion controls here, but if you spend the time to achieve optimal performance, and there's even a few separate mods to help with this now, then you won't find many more immersive VR experiences than exploring Night City. Deep Rock Galactic is another game that's best experienced with friends, and this VR mod even allows you to play alongside others who aren't playing in virtual reality, meaning the pool of players available for your space mining escapades is always plentiful. The mod offers full motion controls and even allows you to physically mine using your trusty pickaxe. However, there are still a few wonky elements that need ironing out, like the appearance of menus, size of text, and a few audio and visual glitches that I encountered whilst I was playing. The devs working on this mod have already dropped some huge improvements though, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this climb the rankings over the next few months. Walking simulators are a perfect fit for VR. Games that want their players to really take in their surroundings and explore every nook and cranny just make sense in a virtual reality setting. It's no surprise then that the brilliant Firewatch makes for one hell of a VR mod. With full motion controls you can explore the park at your own pace, unravelling the mysteries of the story, whilst marvelling at just how incredible the game looks in VR. It might not be for everyone however, and its slower pacing makes for a better seated experience than a standing one. I did also encounter some performance issues during my playthrough, with frame rate being the most obvious problem. However, there have been some considerable updates since then that may very well have improved the few issues I did have personally. Once I've emotionally recovered from the story, I'll have to take it for another spin. From an emotionally devastating walking simulator to a ridiculously hilarious one now, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe VR mod is a wonderful way to experience this updated version of a cult classic. With full motion controls you can hold the bucket in your own two hands and marvel at just how beautiful and awe-inspiring the bucket really is. Yes, it truly is the best bucket I've ever seen in VR. Sadly, most of the environments in Stanley are static, so although the game does include motion controls, you can't use those newfound powers to throw things around or knock over any office supplies, which is a shame, but walking down these bleak yellowish corridors in VR is still awesome for any fan of the original game. Raft has the potential to be one of the best multiplayer VR survival experiences thanks to this new VR mod. Full motion controls and physical actions for things like using the spear, throwing the hook and fishing have all been implemented, and the game even works when playing multiplayer with those who aren't in VR. However, this one is still in early access and does have some wonky jank. The hook doesn't always go where you intend to throw it, and some of the menus are cumbersome to navigate. There's also an odd bug where if you crouch whilst playing VR, your multiplayer friends will also be forced to crouch. Not sure why that is, but it is quite hilarious. I've dreamt of a Left 4 Dead VR game for as long as I can remember. Playing the first game at launch is one of my fondest video game memories of all time, and being able to see these classic locations in VR is incredible. The Left 4 Dead 2 VR mod is still being worked on, but even at this early stage it shows a huge amount of promise. Every map, including modded ones with modded character models and guns, is fully playable in VR, and it runs wonderfully. There are still some teething problems currently, and online multiplayer is a little bit of a pain to set up, but at the rate this project is growing, I'm sure this will be up there with the very best VR mods soon. The first appearance of a Dr. Beef VR mod on this list is Quake 3, and the only reason this one isn't placing higher is purely a personal choice. Dr. Beef has created some of the finest VR mods available, and Quake 3 in terms of polish, performance and control implementation is no exception. However, of all the competitive shooters out there, Quake never really did it for me. I would always personally opt for a single player Dr. Beef VR experience over a solely multiplayer focused arena shooter. But for those who want that, they can dive into Quake 3 for a frantic and fantastic time that truly feels like a native VR game. Morrowind is definitely showing its age now, but that doesn't make it any less of a fantastic game. If you want to make it feel a little more modern and a lot more immersive, however, then this full VR mod is a must. With full motion controls, this nearly feels like a native VR game, and truthfully, if it wasn't for Skyrim VR existing as a native VR experience and a much more polished option for an Elder Scrolls Fantasy in VR, then I'd probably rate this higher as an essential VR mod. Taken at face value though, it's a wonderful VR mod that I would say is only really hampered by the sheer amount of text and reading required in the game. Although it does run great as a standing VR experience, I'd recommend grabbing a seat because you'll be doing a lot of lengthy reading. Is MUVR technically a mod? Probably not. Do I care? No. MUVR is amazing, and I always urge any VR user I speak with to try it out. In a nutshell, MUVR is a virtual bedroom that you can decorate and set up in any way you wish before filling it with emulated retro consoles and ROMs of your favourite games. The consoles appear as they would in the real world and even require you to plug them into the digital CRT TVs before you can play. The games can be organised onto shelves, and they can even display all the original artwork. It's an absolute nostalgic overload and is one of the very best ways I've ever experienced emulation. It can all be done with motion controls or with a gamepad if you prefer that authentic console feel, and the time of day can even be changed to replicate playing games in a dimly lit bedroom with the sun just starting to set. It's only not placing higher on this list really because it's actually not a mod at all. I don't know why it's here. I just love it. Please join me now for a moment of silence as we remember those who sadly lost their lives in 2022. Here we go, top tier, the VR mods that feel so close to native that they might actually fool those who don't know better. Kicking off the god tier is Risk of Rain 2, a game that I loved flat screen but now struggle to play that way due to this incredible VR mod. Full motion controls, gorgeous 3D and slick, easy to navigate menus combine to make this feel truly impressive. It also works in multiplayer and is compatible with other Risk of Rain 2 mods. Once you've played this game in VR, it's hard to go back. The less I tell you about Outer Wilds, the better. It's one of those games that begs to be explored organically without much prior knowledge of the story or setting. Those who go in blind will likely have the most rewarding experience, and in my personal opinion, going in with this VR mod is the best way to do so. Another great example of full motion controls done right, great performance, easy to navigate menus, and an exploration experience that's heightened in every way by virtual reality. An essential VR mod for sure. I couldn't place my favourite game of all time anywhere else in this list really, could I? Dark Souls VR in my opinion is Luke Ross's best VR mod to date due to one very simple reason. It performs beautifully. Due to the way in which Luke achieves the 3D visuals in his mods, most games are difficult to achieve an acceptable standard of frame rate. But Dark Souls is a breeze. The higher frame rate leads to a much more enjoyable and playable experience, which can be tackled in a classic third-person view or a new and devilishly challenging first-person view. Walking into Anor Londo in VR is something I'll never forget, and this VR mod is one I'll be revisiting for years to come. Doom 3 on both the Quest 2 and PC feels like a native VR game. I've often cited it as one of the very best Quest 2 games, and that's crazy considering it isn't even an official release. This mod takes the most horror-centric and isolating Doom game in the franchise's history and turns it into one of the best VR horror experiences available, with full motion controls, B-haptic support, beautifully implemented control schemes, and stunning visuals. It's so easy to see why this is considered one of the very best VR mods. Just make sure you bring your brown pants, because this isn't the chaotic, goofy fun of most other Doom games. This is some scary shit. There's a real trend with this god tier of my VR mods rankings. Most of these games are absolute classics and slightly older games. Their age makes them feel rejuvenated in VR, and because they're a little older, they perform incredibly well even on mobile chipsets, like the Quest 2. The entire Half-Life franchise is basically now playable in VR. Well, it will be when Half-Life 2 VR launches, and that is an amazing thing. Half-Life VR is another exceptional VR port which just feels native. With all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a full VR game, it allows you to experience this classic FPS in a whole new way on PC or Quest. The classics just keep on coming. The original Doom and Doom 2 were two of the very first VR games I played on Quest 2 when I picked mine up at launch, and I was instantly blown away with just how amazing these old games feel in virtual reality. The visual aesthetic instantly transports you to a different era and plants you firmly inside of these historic games. The action is fast, the controls are tight, and once again it feels like a native VR experience. Team that with the fact that you can mod it even further with added gore and extra campaigns, and you have a very good VR mod indeed. Guess what? It's another classic shooter that's been converted to a VR game by a talented group of modders, and now it feels like a native VR experience. What a surprise! Return to Castle Wolfenstein, much like the other games in this god tier, really shines in VR. Being able to peek around corners and blast those cheeky Nazis' heads off before they even know what's coming is an absolute joy. When it comes to rejuvenating a classic game, VR's power is unmatched. We really do need more of these older games ported into VR. Outlast, Bioshock, Aliens vs Predator, Condemned, and Fear, please. My first time playing Subnautica was in VR. Now, I wasn't really scared of the ocean before then, it's just not something that's ever really bothered me, but something about submerging yourself into the darkest depths in Subnautica VR and not knowing what could be lurking down there in the silent pitch black ocean is quite literally terrifying. Especially when a creature the size of a small skyscraper somehow manages to sneak up on you whilst you're harvesting materials. It's absolute nightmare fuel. However, despite the terror, I can't imagine going back to playing Subnautica on a flat screen. The performance and visuals of the VR mod alone are enough to make it my go-to way to experience this game. I just wish it had motion controls. Top 3 now, and these really are the finest VR mods out there. The cream of the crop, the best of the best. First up is Half-Life 2 VR. Launching for free on the 16th of September, this should be at the top of every VR player's wishlists right now. Half-Life 2 VR feels like a product that Valve themselves have created. The sheer amount of love and consideration that's gone into every aspect of this mod is tremendous, and the experience can be customized and tailored to an incredible degree. I can't wait for everyone to get their hands on this because it's a very special VR mod indeed, but for now, don't forget to enter the giveaway in the description from this video to be in with a chance to get the mod 2 weeks early. Of all the AAA developers out there, Capcom are probably the most engaged when it comes to VR. Their commitment to the tech is pretty well known at this stage, and they're continuing to put out amazing VR experiences like the upcoming Resident Evil Village for PSVR 2. However, if you can't wait for that, or maybe you just want more VR Resident Evil action, then the Praydog RE mods are here to blow your mind. This VR framework turns Resident Evil 2, 3, 7 and Village on PC into full-blown VR games with motion controls. physical knife swinging, physical healing, blocking, and first-person viewpoints in the games which were originally third-person. Now, my only complaint with these is that they can be very difficult to run. Even on fairly powerful rigs, you need to put some extra time in to get them running smoothly, and maybe even use the recently released FSR upscaling mod to further improve performance. But if you can get them running, you'll have some of the best VR horror experiences of your life. Speaking of VR horror, could it really be anything else? Alien Isolation's Mother VR mod is an absolute triumph. A 20-hour-long AAA VR experience that runs well on almost any PC and looks like a native VR game just had to sit at the tippity top of this VR mods ranking list for me personally. I played through the entire game recently and loved every single second of it. It was far more tense, far more terrifying, and far more memorable than my flat screen playthrough. And even without full motion controls, it felt like this was always destined to be a VR game. And that brings me to the end of this video. Please do remember that these rankings are completely subjective. They are just my own rankings based on my own opinions and my own time spent with these mods, but I've played them all and I've thoroughly enjoyed all of them for their own merits, and I just continue to be amazed and continue to be appreciative of the VR modding community. You are the lifeblood of the VR community, and you're giving us these incredible AAA VR experiences. Keep them coming. I cannot wait to see what we get in 2023, and even in the back end of 2022. There's still a few months left. If you've enjoyed the video, guys, please do leave a like, leave a comment, and hit subscribe, and I'll see you very soon for another one. Take care, guys. See you later.